She escaped the Tempest and entered his Sentinel's shelter. Humans were not forgotten. A relentless, howling tempest swept across the barren planet of Vera. The air above the ravaged surface boiled with violence, swirling sand and shards of metal flung by winds that could shred flesh from bone. The survey vessel Sandrunner, a compact, battered craft, pitched and lurched through the chaos. Inside the cockpit, Cyrene gripped the controls until her knuckles whitened beneath the polymer weave of her gloves. Sirens blared, console lights flashed an angry crimson, and the shriek of the storm outside was matched only by the shuddering groans of the ship's hull. Her harness bit into her shoulders as a sudden, brutal jolt slammed her sideways. Her helmet cracked against the display, sending spiderweb fissures through the visor. Blood, luminous and shimmering, trickled down her cheek, proof that even Lithari resilience was no match for Vera's infamous storms. The old legends had not lied. Vera was a place that chewed up the unworthy and spat out their bones. Cyrene blinked, clearing her vision, and forced her thoughts away from the pain. The Sandrunner's energy cells were nearly drained, hull integrity was failing, and her right leg had twisted at an unnatural angle beneath the console. Each breath was a battle. Training took over where panic threatened to rise. Her fingers danced over the controls, routing what little power remained into the emergency ejection system. The cockpit canopy split with a tortured scream, and she was ripped from the pilot's seat, flung bodily into the screaming maelstrom. For a moment, she tumbled weightless in a hell of shrieking wind and abrasive grit. The world blurred into violent motion, sand lashing against her suit with enough force to peel paint from alloy. She hit the ground hard, skidding across the ravine floor. Her leg throbbed, white-hot with agony. The suit's display flickered, 3% power, oxygen low. She gritted her teeth and began to crawl, each meter a fresh trial. Her palms stung as they scraped against jagged metal plating buried in the sand, relics of ships that had come before and failed. A sudden lull cut through the storm, brief but precious. Cyrene lifted her head, squinting through her fractured visor. There, a steady amber glow, unwavering in the chaos. It was not the erratic flash of lightning or the bioluminescent creatures that sometimes haunted these canyons. It was deliberate, purposeful, a beacon. She dragged herself toward it, one desperate pull after another. Every muscle screamed, every heartbeat thundered. The glow resolved into an entry hatch, half buried in sand and armored against the storm's wrath. She reached up, fingers numb and clumsy, and hammered on the door. The world tilted, narrowed, then slipped into darkness. A hiss, sharp and clean, the unmistakable sound of an airlock disengaging. Warm, golden light spilled out, cutting through the storm's shadow. A figure stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably human. Cyrene's last thought before she succumbed was an old Lithari tale, a phantom, a relic of the past. The world went black. Inside the refuge, Mason moved with a practiced urgency. Alarms still flickered on his control panel, but his focus was on the motionless form sprawled across the entryway. He hadn't seen another soul in years. He had watched her crawl across the ravine on his grainy monitors, a desperate, stubborn spark of life in a world that had tried to kill it. He knelt beside her, lifting her with surprising gentleness. The armor was battered, pitted by the storm, but he recognized the graceful lines and the intricate filigree, Lithari craftsmanship. He carried her through the narrow corridors to the med bay, laid her on the padded bench, and began stripping away the ruined armor. Beneath it, her skin glimmered with a subtle blue-violet sheen. A silver-white braid spilled across her shoulder, tangled and streaked with blood. She was tall, statuesque, beautiful in an otherworldly way. Mason paused, awe and loneliness warring in his chest. He set her broken leg, wincing in sympathy as he heard the bone click into place. He sprayed a regenerative foam, watching it knit tissue with astonishing speed, then hooked her up to nutrient drips. Silence pressed in around him, heavier than ever before. He realized suddenly how long it had been since he'd spoken aloud to anyone but himself. Cyrene drifted back to consciousness slowly, sensation returning in waves. A hiss. Medical injector. Instinct overrode reason. Her eyes snapped open, hand darting to the blade sheathed at her thigh. She surged upright, blade at the ready, and lunged. Mason's grip was steady, unflinching. He caught her wrist and held her in place. "Easy," he said, voice calm, eyes level. The words filtered through her comm band, translated into the familiar tones of her own tongue. "You're safe." She froze, blade quivering at his throat, violet eyes wide with disbelief. This couldn't be. Humans were supposed to be extinct, erased from the galaxy. Yet here he was, solid, composed, hands sure and steady, not fragile at all. "What are you?" she demanded, voice a hoarse whisper. "I'm Mason," he replied quietly. "A human." The words hung between them, impossible and undeniable. For a long moment neither moved. Then Cyrene slowly lowered her blade. A silent truce settled over the room. Mason stepped back, giving her space. She rose unsteadily, testing her injured leg, and limped from the medbay. He watched her survey the interior of the shelter with a sentinel's wariness. The greenhouse was lush, verdant, filled with trailing vines, soft mosses, and glowing fruit. Sculptures of glass and stone lined the shelves, playful and abstract. Cyrene's gaze lingered on them, puzzled. To her, such things were frivolous, unnecessary in a place built for survival. Without a word, Mason ladled steaming root stew into a bowl and set it on the table, retreating to the far side of the room. Cyrene eyed the food with suspicion, then curiosity. She tasted it, warm, savory, subtly spiced. After years of ration packs, the flavor was startling, almost intoxicating. Later, as she tried and failed to realign her dislocated shoulder, Mason approached her quietly, hands outstretched. "Let me help," he offered. She hesitated, measuring his intent, then gave a single, wary nod. He knelt beside her, his touch steady and confident. "Exhale," he instructed. She obeyed. With one swift motion, he reset the joint. A burst of pain, then relief. His thumb lingered against her skin, a gentle reassurance, a gesture with no purpose but kindness. Cyrene felt her breath catch, her defenses wavering. The storm still raged outside, but inside, something softer, stranger, had begun. Days blurred together, measured only by the stubborn march of the clock and the storm's endless roar. Outside, Vera's winds screamed and rattled the shelter's reinforced walls, but inside, a fragile peace settled. Cyrene healed, her body mending beneath Mason's careful ministrations and the regenerative patches that seemed almost magical in their efficiency. She observed him in silence, learning his rhythms, the way he rose before the storm's peak, tending to the hydroponic garden with a gentle touch, the quiet hours he spent reading old logs on a battered data tablet, lips moving silently over words in a language half lost to history. In the evenings, Mason sat among the green shadows of the greenhouse, humming melodies that wound through the air like ghosts. Sometimes he whistled, low and haunting, a tune that caught Cyrene's ear and lingered long after he fell quiet. His patience disarmed her more than any weapon. When she stumbled, he offered a steadying hand. When she withdrew, he never pressed. In this small world, Cyrene found herself lowering her guard, inch by inch. One evening, as the storm battered the world with unbroken fury, Cyrene stood by the viewport, arms folded, gaze fixed on the swirling amber gloom. Mason worked quietly behind her, repairing a fractured irrigation pipe. The silence stretched, thick as the walls between them. At last she spoke, her voice a soft intrusion. "This storm is engineered. Its cycles are too precise, down to the minute. Nothing natural is that disciplined." Mason paused, setting his tools aside. He met her gaze, a shadow flickering in his gray eyes, a sorrow old and deep. "You're right. It is." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, and gestured for her to follow. They wound through the corridors, past humming generators and walls lined with faded mission patches. At the heart of the shelter, Mason keyed open a sealed door. Cold blue light spilled out, illuminating the core chamber's vaulted ceiling and banks of ancient servers. In the center, a pedestal pulsed with dormant energy. Mason tapped a control. A hollow projector whirred to life, painting the air with grainy light. The image coalesced. A broad-shouldered man in a battered uniform, eyes fierce, hair silver at the temples. He spoke in the old tongue, but the comm band translated, overlaying his words with perfect clarity. "I am Commander Jace Rowan, final log, year 879 of the Solarian Reckoning. If you're hearing this, humanity's exile succeeded, or failed. The starways are gone. Vera is our last bastion. We built the Sentinel to shield this world, nanites, programmed to storm and scour, to keep outsiders at bay. Our children, and theirs, will survive beneath its watch. We become myth, so that you, our legacy, may have a future." The log ended, leaving the chamber in ringing silence. Cyrene stared at the fading image, her mind reeling. The storm was no accident. It was a weapon, a guardian, and Mason was its steward, not just a survivor, but the keeper of a promise centuries old. She turned to him, searching his face. "All these years, you've been alone, guarding a world that forgot you." Mason shrugged, a small, wry smile on his lips. "Not forgotten, just waiting." Back in the archive, Cyrene moved among the relics of a vanished civilization. She traced her fingers along a holographic map of the old Solarian Union, its spiral arms once teeming with life. "It's so immense, all of it. Gone." He stood beside her, gaze fixed on the shifting stars. Not gone, waiting, like seeds under ash. She watched him carefully, noting the gentle way he handled the artifacts, the reverence in his touch. "Why do you make art? The sculptures, the music? What's the point?" His mouth quirked in a sad smile. "Resistance, I guess. The world wanted us to be silent, so I build, I sing. It's a way to remember that I'm human." He led her to a low shelf where a sculpture stood, two figures entwined, glass and stone fused in a spiral. Cyrene studied it, tilting her head. "What does it mean?" "They're partners," Mason said softly. "For humans, touch speaks. It's how we show trust, affection, when words aren't enough." He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "May I?" She drew in a breath, then nodded. He reached out, fingers trembling just slightly, and brushed her cheek. His skin was warm, roughened by years of labor. Cyrene shivered, her defenses faltering. His hand slipped behind her neck, thumb tracing her jaw in a gentle arc. "This is a caress," he whispered. Their faces drew close, the air between them charged with something fragile and electric. Cyrene's eyes fluttered shut, breath mingling with his. A klaxon split the moment, harsh, urgent. Red lights strobed along the corridor, and the shelter's AI voice crackled overhead. "Sentinel system destabilization detected. Structural breaches imminent." Mason broke away, all tenderness replaced by sudden focus. He darted to the control panel, fingers flying across the keys as data scrolled past in a blur. "The Sentinel is destabilizing," he said, voice tight. "Your ship. Its power core must have triggered a feedback loop. The storm's nanites are out of sync. If the core isn't shut down, the whole refuge will be torn apart." The floor trembled beneath them, dust sifting from the ceiling. Cyrene's senses sharpened, battle instincts snapping into place. She grabbed a toolkit, glancing at Mason. "What do you need me to do?" He pointed to the far wall, where hairline fractures snaked through the alloy. We need to brace the structure, or it'll collapse before we can reach your ship. The core's not far, but the storm's intensifying. Cyrene didn't hesitate. She darted to the supply rack, hefting heavy support beams across her shoulders. With her Lithari strength, she wedged them into place, bracing the wall as another tremor rippled through the floor. Mason worked beside her, reinforcing the seals, sweat slicking his brow. It wasn't enough. The Sentinel's feedback whined, a banshee shriek echoing through the corridors. The air tasted metallic, charged with static. Panels buckled, vents rattling loose. Mason turned to Cyrene, urgency burning in his eyes. We have to go. Now. If we shut down your ship's core, it should stabilize the Sentinel, at least long enough to repair the breach. She nodded once, already strapping herself into her suit. Mason did the same, his hands sure despite the chaos. They moved in sync, each trusting the other without need for words. Cyrene passed him a tether line, anchoring it to her belt. Ready? Mason asked, voice muffled by his helmet. Ready, Cyrene replied, her tone fierce. Together, they cycled through the airlock, stepping into the maelstrom that raged outside. Sand and nanites battered their suits, but they pressed forward, tethered together, two figures braving the heart of a storm, united by necessity and by the unspoken trust that had grown between them. They plunged into the storm, a churning vortex of wind and nanites, each gust laced with razor-edged grit and electrical fury. Tethered together, Mason and Cyrene pressed forward, boots sinking into the shifting sand, the world around them reduced to howling chaos and flickering shadows. Mason led, his frame hunched against the gale, visor glowing with HUD overlays. Cyrene shielded him, her body interposed between him and the worst of the flying debris. When the storm hurled a jagged slab of metal toward them, she yanked Mason close, wrapping her arms around his shoulders as the shard clanged off her armored back. When she staggered, buffeted by a surge of wind or a stinging blast of nanite grit, Mason's grip on the tether anchored her, steady, unwavering. No words were needed. They moved as one, reading each other's intentions in every shift of weight, every silent glance exchanged through polarized glass. Trust, absolute and unspoken, pulsed between them. Through the maelstrom, the twisted wreck of Cyrene's skiff loomed at last, half buried in sand and storm debris. The hull glimmered with static, lines of fractured alloy sparking blue in the darkness. Cyrene surged forward, fists pounding on the battered hatch until the ancient seals groaned and released. Together they forced the door aside, ducking into the wreck. Inside, the air was thick with ozone and the sharp tang of coolant. Mason's lamp flickered over the controls, a panel sparking, the distress beacon blaring with a pulsing red strobe. Each beat was a cry for rescue, a summons that could draw scavengers, predators, or worse. The core at the center of the skiff thrummed with unstable energy, its readouts fluctuating wildly. Mason dropped to one knee, hands flying over the interface. "The containment's shot," he muttered, voice taut. "I can shut it down, but—" A tremor rocked the wreck. The emergency power failed, plunging them into total blackness. The hatch slammed shut behind them, locking with a hollow clang. Cyrene's breath rasped through her helmet, heartbeat pounding in her ears. "We're trapped," she said, voice barely audible. Mason's hand found hers in the darkness, their gloves scraping together before fingers laced, fierce and desperate. In that grip, solidarity, fear, defiance, and something more electric than the storm. Every nerve in Cyrene's body blazed. A single strip of emergency lights flickered on, painting their faces in a dim, reddish glow. Mason reached up, fumbling with the release on his helmet. Cyrene hesitated, then followed, the hiss of decompressing seals loud in the silence. She drew a shaky breath, tasting the scorched air, and met his gaze. In the faint light, his eyes were storm gray, dilated with adrenaline and longing. Without thinking, she leaned forward, Their lips collided, hard, searching, urgent. Cyrene's silver-white braid tangled in Mason's fingers as his other hand pressed to her waist. Her own hands sought his face, jaw rough beneath her palms, breath mingling as they kissed. A collision of need and hope, a promise in the dark. Time dissolved. The world was only this, hands at the small of her back, her pulse racing, the friction of cloth against skin. Mason's lips were gentle, then hungry, matching the rhythm of the storm outside. Cyrene clung to him, feeling herself unravel and knit together all at once. The kiss was not delicate, but raw, unfiltered, necessary. They broke apart at last, breathless. The world rushed back, the warning siren, the rising heat, the threat of the core. Clarity returned, edged with determination. Cyrene tore away a panel, exposing the core's access conduit. "We have to vent the energy buildup. Here, hold this." She passed Mason a fused cable, their hands brushing, the jolt of contact sending a fresh wave of electricity through her. Mason worked fast, coaxing the reactor's ancient systems into compliance. Cyrene found the emergency override, fingers moving with practiced precision. Together, they bypassed burnt circuits and rerouted coolant, their minds locked in silent synchronization. "There, the beacon line," Mason said, pointing. Cyrene severed it with a spark of her blade. Instantly, the blaring alarm died. The core's hum faded to a steady, safe pulse. A hush fell, broken only by their ragged breathing. The storm outside dulled, the nanite-laced wind losing its shrill, predatory edge. Cyrene pressed her forehead to Mason's, relief a physical force. With renewed strength, they forced the hatch open, cold wind flooding the wreck. The tether line now trailed between them, not just a lifeline, but a symbol of something forged in adversity. They limped back through the battered landscape, supporting each other through drifts of sand and swirling fog. The shelter's lights beckoned, a golden promise against the bruised sky. Inside, warmth closed around them, shutting out the world's fury. They tended to wounds in companionable silence, Cyrene's gashed arm, Mason's bruised ribs. She bound his side with steady hands, wincing when he sucked in a sharp breath. "You're tougher than you look," she teased, voice low. He grinned, brushing a lock of hair from her brow. "So are you." Later they shared another meal, root stew and fruit slices, the flavors richer than Cyrene remembered. The storm outside had quieted to a dull, distant murmur. Mason sat opposite her, eyes thoughtful. "It's done," he said quietly. "The Sentinel's stabilizing. The storm will calm. You'll have your window to leave." The words struck her like a blow. She looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers. "That was the goal," she replied, but her voice was uncertain. He nodded, not pressing, but the ache in his eyes mirrored the one rising in her chest. If she left, she would abandon him and his secret, break the trust they'd built, and perhaps doom him if her people returned. If she stayed, she would forsake her duty and her past. The hardest trial was no longer survival, but choice. At last, the storm broke. For the first time in ages, the sky was clear. Cyrene stood in the garden, marveling at the sweep of stars overhead, points of silver in a canvas of deep violet. With Mason's help, she repaired the skiff, hands working side by side, their movements wordless but brimming with unspoken meaning. Every glance lingered, every brush of skin sparked with memory. On the final day, Cyrene stood before her ship, her heart pounding. The hull gleamed ready. Her duty, her future, waited inside. But when she looked back, Mason stood in the garden, half in shadow, watching her with hope and quiet anguish. She turned from the ship, walking slowly to him. Her hand found his, fingers entwining. Mason squeezed back, relief and joy warring on his face. No words were needed. Together, they entered the sanctuary. Outside, the storm resumed its ceaseless vigil, wind singing against the walls. But inside, the shelter was no longer a prison, nor a tomb of legends. It was a home, bound together by the storm and by the choice they had made. 5 years passed beneath the restless sky of Vera. The tempest that had once raged unchecked was now a controlled barrier, a shimmering wall of nanites dancing above the canyon, sculpted and restrained by Mason's careful hand and Cyrene's warrior instinct. The storm had become a guardian instead of a threat, keeping the world outside at bay, but allowing peace to take root within the ravine. Mason and Cyrene built a life together, day by day. The shelter, once a lonely outpost, grew into a home shaped by their shared routines. Each morning began with the hum of generators and the scent of sun-warmed herbs from the garden. Cyrene, whose hands had once been forged for battle, learned to coax fragile shoots from the soil. She worked beside Mason, her movements at first sharp and methodical, then gradually gentled by his patience and laughter. In the evenings they retreated to the observatory, a dome they had built themselves atop the highest ledge, its walls spun from salvaged glass and reinforced with nanite weave. There, they lay side by side, arms entwined, gazing at the stars as they shimmered through the living veil overhead. The nanite storm refracted the starlight, painting the observatory floor with bands of gold and violet. Mason's solitude, once a heavy cloak, had fallen away. With Cyrene, he found purpose that ran deeper than survival. He moved through each day with a quiet joy, whether tuning the greenhouse hydrocycles or playing music for her on an old hand-carved flute. Laughter was a frequent visitor now, unexpected, ringing out between the gentle arguments and the shared discoveries. Cyrene, too, changed. She had come to Vera a sentinel, a weapon honed by duty and loss. Now, she learned gentleness, the art of patience, the delight in imperfection. She marveled at the riotous colors of Mason's flowers, at the stubbornness of root vegetables, at the way a seed could crack stone if given time. One evening they stood together in the observatory, arms looped around each other's waists. The canyon was awash with blue light, the storm humming overhead. Mason grinned as he watched Cyrene knead compost into a planting tray. "You treat the soil as if it's an enemy," he teased, voice warm with affection. Cyrene narrowed her eyes, glancing at him sidelong. "It resists efficiency," she shot back, her tone half mocking, half defensive. Mason's laughter rumbled through his chest. He tucked a stray strand of her silver hair behind her ear, his thumb lingering on her cheek. "Imperfection is half the point," he murmured. "It's where beauty hides, where life finds a way in." She leaned into his touch, letting her defenses fall away. "Your human fascination with flaws is strange to me." "It's our greatest gift," he whispered, and kissed her. A slow, familiar kiss, full of memory and hope. The observatory spun around them, the stars their silent witnesses, their peace fractured with the sharp chime of the AI. "Anomaly detected. Unidentified energy trace," the voice intoned, slicing through the quiet. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted, intimacy replaced by alertness. They hurried to the control panel, shoulders brushing as they leaned in. On the display, a pale blue dot flickered at the edge of the system, a Lithari seeker probe, ancient and methodical in its path. Cyrene's breath caught. "It's not a ship," she said, "but it's thorough. If it finds anything, it will report home." Mason's fingers danced over the controls, zooming in on the probe's telemetry. "Its scan patterns are predictable. It will reach the outer atmosphere in under 3 days. If it catches any anomaly, any sign of us, it will transmit everything." They weighed their options in tense silence. Cyrene's jaw was set, her eyes cold and clear. "We could destroy it," she said, "but that would guarantee a deeper search. A warship, maybe." "Or we could do nothing," Mason countered. hope it moves on. But if it doesn't, if it even suspects, everything we've built could be lost. Cyrene ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident. If it calls home, the council will come. They'll take the sanctuary, take you. He reached out, taking her hand. There's another way, he said softly. We don't have to hide, not completely. What if we use the Sentinel, not just as a shield, but as a storyteller? She frowned, curiosity overcoming tension. What do you mean? Mason's eyes gleamed with sudden inspiration. The storm is more than a weapon. Its nanites can broadcast data, imagery, memory, history. If we craft a message, one only the probe can receive, maybe we can shape what it reports. Give it a story to take home, not a threat, not a prize, but a legend. Cyrene studied him, her skepticism softening into wonder. A legend? He nodded. The Sentinel storm, the world beneath, the Phantom Guardian. If they believe it's all myth, something sacred, untouchable, they'll stay away. The Lithari revere stories, sometimes more than conquest. She considered this, weighing possibilities. We'd need to encode it perfectly. It can't feel like a trap. Mason squeezed her hand, hope in his gaze. Then let's make it beautiful. Let's make it true. Together they turned back to the control panel, the glow of the observatory wrapping them in silver light. The probe drew closer, patient as the years they had spent in hiding. As the first signals from the seeker reached the edge of the storm, Mason and Cyrene worked side by side, shaping a legend from memory and love. Outside, the nanite storm shimmered, alive with possibility. Mason and Cyrene set their plan in motion before the sun crested Vera's eastern ridge. The observatory hummed with anticipation and electric possibility. Mason worked at the central console, fine-tuning the echo array, a marvel of hybrid technology. Lithari's signal craft, delicate as spun glass, was laced with the robust, adaptable logic of human nanite engineering. The Sentinel's nanites responded to their commands, pulsing with latent energy as they prepared to rewrite the very story the world would tell. Cyrene's hands moved with swift precision, patching data lines, calibrating frequency modulators. She barely spoke, her concentration absolute, but Mason could read the flickers of tension in her eyes. The probe's presence haunted every movement, a silent judge, patient and relentless. They knew the stakes. Exposure would mean the end of their sanctuary, and possibly their lives. "We're ready," Mason said, voice low, as the final diagnostic flashed green. He looked to Cyrene, seeking affirmation. She nodded, lips pressed in a determined line. "Begin the emission cycle." "I'll record the log." He initiated the sequence. The Sentinel's nanite cloud swirled in the upper atmosphere, radiating a crafted energy signature, one that mimicked the decay of a long-abandoned human colony. Static-laced ghost signals rippled through the canyon, washing over the probe as it drifted at the edge of the system, sensors open and hungry. Cyrene slipped on the modulation mask. Her voice, usually vibrant and strong, shifted, softened, distorted by the interface. She stared into the hollow recorder, eyes shining with the gravity of invention. "Echolog, Outpost Sierra 9, final entry," she began, her tone mournful, words carefully chosen. "Plague breached the airlocks. Quarantine failed. There are none left now, only silence and dust. I set this warning that others may live. No hope remains. This world is lost." The transmission was brief, but it echoed through the array, a dirge etched in code and memory. Mason watched her as she finished, awed by her resolve. She removed the mask, and for a heartbeat, her hand trembled before she stilled it. They uploaded the fabricated logs and telemetry. The data streamed across the void, latching onto the probe's open channel. Mason's heart thudded in his chest, every second stretched thin with anxiety. Cyrene stood beside him, her hand finding his, fingers lacing tightly. They watched as the probe's systems came alive, beams of blue light flickering over the data, algorithms digesting every byte. Cyrene's breath caught. "It's analyzing," she whispered. Minutes ticked by, each one a lifetime. The probe's decision subroutines cycled again and again. Then, at last, a result. The probe classified the system as a lost human outpost, listed it as a quarantine zone, and issued a warning in every known Lithari dialect: danger, no entry. The Sentinel storm was listed as a containment measure, too hazardous for investigation. The probe's engines flared, and it resumed its cold patrol, curving away from the canyon's orbit. Their secret was safe. For a long moment, neither spoke. Relief broke over them, wild and exhilarating. Mason let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned to Cyrene, a slow grin spreading across his face. "We did it," he murmured, voice full of wonder. She smiled back, brilliant and fierce. "We did." Hand in hand, they left the humming machines behind, walking the winding path up to the observatory dome. Dawn's golden light filtered through the nanite veil, scattering rainbows over the canyon walls. The storm, their silent sentinel, shimmered overhead, no longer a threat, but a companion. They stood at the edge of the glass, looking out over the land they had claimed, hearts still racing. Mason glanced sideways at Cyrene, watching the sunlight play across her silver-white hair, the strength in her shoulders softened by the glow. He squeezed her hand, thumb brushing her knuckles. She turned to face him, her voice softer than he'd ever heard. "My people treasure legacy above all things. For years I thought I'd forsaken mine, that I had become only a guardian for someone else's past." He watched her, questions unspoken in his eyes. Cyrene drew his hands to her abdomen, pressing them gently to her belly. "I was wrong, Mason. I was building a new one." For a moment, her meaning hung suspended between them, fragile, hopeful, immense. Then, realization dawned in Mason's gaze, his breath catching as tears filled his eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. He traced the line of her jaw, voice rough with emotion. "You mean—" She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek, and smiled. A smile of pure, radiant certainty. A child. A future. The joining of human endurance and Lithari grace. A legacy forged not of war or exile, but of love. Mason gathered her close, his arms strong around her. He pressed his forehead to hers, laughter and tears mingling in the bright morning air. Together they looked out over their world, a world they had saved, claimed, and remade. Above, the Sentinel storm shimmered on, its secret kept, its guardians watching the dawn. Their lives continued in harmony, the days flowing together in a gentle rhythm beneath the watchful shimmer of the Sentinel storm. What had once been a harbinger of ruin was now their guardian and companion, its shifting nanite veil a constant soothing presence above the canyon. The world outside was still wild and dangerous, but within the shelter and the observatory, peace had settled like morning dew. The observatory became the heart of their sanctuary. Its domed ceiling caught the filtered light, scattering it over Cyrene and Mason as they worked, dreamed, and planned. Cyrene's pregnancy was their new axis, the miracle around which every other joy orbited. Each day brought fresh anticipation, plans for a nursery nestled between the greenhouse and the living quarters, sketches of soft blankets and cribs, debates over names that blended the music of Terran and Lithari languages. In the evenings, Mason played music for the child not yet born, soft chords on a battered old guitar, the sound winding around Cyrene as she lay back, eyes closed, a smile curving her lips. Sometimes he hummed lullabies from a world the child would never see, his fingers gentle against her rounded belly. "Maybe you'll have your mother's voice," he would murmur, pressing a kiss to Cyrene's skin. "Or her stubbornness." Cyrene laughed, her hands covering his. Careful what you wish for, Mason. Two stubborn souls might be more than even you can handle. He grinned, folding her into his arms, their laughter mingling with the soft song of the storm outside. They filled their home with new stories. Each week, they recorded tales, sometimes Mason's, full of Terran myth and memory, sometimes Cyrene's, the fierce old epics of the Lithari transformed by her gentler perspective. They wove these legends together, inventing new endings, blending courage with hope and sorrow with joy. Cyrene, once trained to wield only blade and command, discovered poetry in her own words. Her verses were spare but luminous, honoring both worlds and the bridge their love had built. Mason, for his part, shaped figures from the soft stone he quarried near the ravine's edge. His hands were sure, his vision clear. 3 figures, always twined together in a circle: promise, future, belonging. One sculpture sat beside their bed, another near the nursery. The third he placed at the heart of the observatory, facing outward, so the stars and the storm could bear silent witness. Some afternoons, they sat together on the observatory floor, surrounded by books and maps, imagining the places their child would one day explore. Mason traced routes across ancient Terran continents and spun stories of blue oceans and green forests. Cyrene described the mountain cities of her ancestors, painted in words as radiant as the colors of her homeworld's dawn. Their preparations were practical too. Mason reinforced the shelter's walls, adding fresh nanite mesh where old plating had worn thin. Cyrene converted an empty storage bay into a sunlit nursery, lining the walls with painted constellations and Lithari glyphs. They tested air recyclers and calibrated the Sentinel's parameters to guard their growing family, leaving nothing to chance. In the quiet of night, when the only sounds were the distant hum of the storm and the soft exhale of Cyrene's breath, Mason would sit beside her, his hands splayed protectively across her belly. He spoke to their child in a low, reverent tone, promising a world safe and full of wonder. "Our child will never know loneliness," he murmured, voice thick with love and certainty. "Only love." Cyrene opened her eyes, their violet depths luminous in the silver-blue glow. She reached for his hand, weaving her fingers with his. "And strength, and stories, a legacy of both." Their laughter filled the shelter, echoing through the corridors, transforming old memories of silence into something bright and enduring. The nursery soon overflowed with little gifts: soft woven blankets, carved animal figures, tiny shoes shaped by Mason's patient hands. Cyrene embroidered a tapestry for the wall, each stitch a wish for the future. There were moments, too, when fear crept in. Flashes of old battles, the shadow of loss, the uncertainty of what might still come from beyond the storm. In those moments, Mason would draw Cyrene close and remind her, "We are not alone. We have each other. We have this place. We have hope." And she, fierce and unyielding even in tenderness, would answer, "We are more than what we were. We are what we have chosen." Sometimes, when sleep eluded them, they would return to the observatory, lying side by side beneath the dome. The storm glowed softly outside, its nanites casting gentle ripples of light across their faces. Mason would rest his head on Cyrene's shoulder, listening to the steady beat of her heart, the promise of life growing within. One night, as the world outside shimmered with pale fire, Mason sat with his arm around Cyrene, his palms splayed across the curve of her belly. His voice was a whisper, thick with emotion. "I used to think I'd always be alone, that humanity was finished, a story told only to the wind. But here, with you, I know better." Cyrene smiled, her gaze soft and proud. "Love endures. That is our story." He turned to her, brushing a stray lock of silver hair from her brow. "Our child will never know the emptiness I once felt," he promised. "Never the ache of silence, only the warmth of belonging. Only love. And strength, Serene replied, eyes shining. And stories, always stories. Their words were a vow, quiet but unyielding, echoing through the shelter that had once been a tomb. Now it was alive with laughter, with hope, with the memory of old sorrows transformed into the promise of tomorrow. The storm outside kept its ceaseless watch, but inside, life blossomed, gentle, resilient, unafraid. Humanity was not extinct. It waited, adapted, and loved anew. In the heart of a storm, on a world forgotten by the stars, two souls had found a beginning. The Sentinel storm shimmered in the endless night, a silent guardian, and inside, love endured. This brings our story to a close. Don't forget to hit subscribe, give the video a like, and share in the comments which part you enjoyed the most. Our team will truly appreciate your support. There are plenty more exciting stories waiting for you on our channel. See you in the next video.